Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that one of the most powerful, clarifying, and liberating states you can ever experience is found not in the warmth of connection, but in its complete and utter absence? I'm talking about a concept our society has taught us to fear, the hidden, sacred power of having no friends. Now, let's be absolutely clear before we proceed. This is not a discussion about the sharp, aching pain of loneliness. Loneliness is a hunger for something you believe you have lost. What we are exploring today is the profound fullness of being truly alone, a state where you don't lose yourself in the void, but finally, for the first time, find yourself in the vastness, because in that silent, empty space that we are all conditioned to run from, something ancient, wild, and extraordinary awakens. Stay with me on this journey, because by the end of our time together, you will understand why fleeing from solitude might be the very act that keeps you from the unshakable freedom you have always been seeking. Imagine for a moment that you are utterly, completely alone, not lonely. No, that's a story the mind tells about being alone, but simply, factually, alone. There are no voices in your ear offering opinions, no subtle expectations to meet, no carefully constructed masks to wear. It is just you, the expansive sky above, the solid earth beneath, and the infinite, uncharted space within you. What happens in that silence? Most of us spend our entire lives running from this very possibility. We treat solitude like a disease to be cured. We cling to friendships, chase after social approval, and meticulously measure our self-worth by the number of people who smile at us. And yet, there is a strange and forgotten magic that stirs only in the state of having no friends. Not because friendship itself is unimportant, but because in that empty, unmirrored space, something far more fundamental awakens. Our society perpetuates a powerful illusion, the illusion of the crowd. It tells us that to be alone is to be lost, adrift, and incomplete, like a single puzzle piece useless without the rest of the picture. But what if the opposite were true? What if the crowd, with all its deafening noise, its endless demands, and its conflicting desires, is the very thing that scatters our soul and fragments our true nature? When you consciously step away, when you allow the world and its clamor to fall silent, you begin to hear something else entirely. It is the sound of your own being, not the you that others have named and defined, not the you that performs and pleases and apologizes, but the deeper, wilder self that existed long before the world told you who you were supposed to be. Take a moment to consider the sheer, crushing weight of all the voices you carry with you. It's not just the people around you now, it's the accumulated, ghostly echoes of everyone who has ever told you who you are, what you should want, and how you ought to feel. From our earliest childhood, we are trained to see ourselves only through the eyes of others. We learn to measure our worth by the reactions we provoke in them. A smile means we are good and acceptable. A frown means we have strayed and must correct our course. And so, we begin to shape ourselves, bending our nature, contorting our spirit, until the reflection we see in the social mirror seems pleasing enough to pass inspection. But what happens when that mirror is taken away, when there are no faces around to reflect back an image of you. Who are you then? The crowd, with its constant, low-grade hum of approval and disapproval, acts as a kind of mass hypnosis. It convinces us that reality is consensus, that truth is simply whatever most people happen to agree upon at any given moment. But this is a fragile, terrifying illusion. If you step back for just a moment, you'll notice something deeply unsettling. The crowd itself is made up of individuals just as uncertain and lost as you are. Each person is glancing sideways, checking to see if they're doing life correctly, hoping their performance is convincing enough. We mistake this shared, collective anxiety for solid ground, as if the mere fact that everyone is running in the same direction makes it the right one. But 1,000 people dreaming the same dream doesn't make it any less of a dream. In the absence of friends, in the absence of that constant social feedback loop, something peculiar and wonderful begins to occur. The scripts you've been handed, the ones that insist you must be charming, successful, agreeable, or whatever it is your particular tribe values, start to lose their hypnotic grip. Without an audience, performance becomes absurd and meaningless. You are no longer the good friend, the reliable one, or the life of the party. Those roles, you begin to realize, were never you to begin with. They were costumes, intricately designed and skillfully worn to navigate the complex world of human interaction. Stripped of them, you are left with a quiet, almost unnerving question that echoes in the silence. If no one is watching, who am I when I'm not trying to be anything at all? This is precisely where the magic lies. Without the crowd's constant murmur, you begin to hear subtler, older voices. The rustle of leaves against your window is no longer just background noise. It becomes a form of speech. The steady rhythm of your own breathing is no longer an unconscious biological function. It becomes a profound conversation with the air itself. You start to notice that the rigid boundaries you always took for granted, the line between me and the world, between inside and outside, are far more porous and illusory than you ever imagined. The wind on your skin isn't just something happening to you, it's something you are a part of. The line between the listener and the sound, between the observer and the observed, begins to soften and blur. This is not loneliness. Let us be clear on that. Loneliness is the ache for missing pieces, the hunger for external validation to make you feel whole. What we are speaking of here is something far more radical. It is the discovery that the pieces were never missing to begin with. It is the realization that the self isn't a puzzle to be completed by others, but a vast and shimmering existence that was only ever obscured by the frantic act of trying to define it through social mirrors. The crowd tells you that you are small, that you are a fragment, that you need to be completed by relationships, by achievements, by things outside of yourself. But in true solitude, you stumble upon the outrageous, liberating truth that you were never incomplete. And here's the real cosmic joke. The crowd knows this, too, deep down, beneath all the chatter and the posturing. Every single person is just as terrified of being truly alone as you are. Not because solitude is inherently dangerous, but because it reveals the lie at the heart of the social game. It reveals that the emperor has no clothes. It shows that the frantic search for belonging is often just a way to avoid facing the boundless, terrifying, and exhilarating freedom of your own existence. So, when you find yourself without friends, for a season or for a lifetime, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't immediately distract yourself. Sit with it. Let it unsettle you. Let it strip you bare. Because in that unsettling, in that delicious discomfort, you might just stumble upon the one thing the crowd can never, ever give you, the unshakable, inexplicable realization that you were never truly alone to begin with. You are, in fact, the very thing you've been seeking all along. This is the alchemy of solitude. Alone, you are finally free to dissolve. Without the constant reflection of others holding your ego in place, it softens. There is no one to impress, no role to play, no social score to keep. And in that magnificent absence, something curious happens. The trees, the stars, the passing stranger, all of it becomes part of an unspoken conversation. When you have no friends to define you, you become friends with everything. Consider the peculiar process that occurs when you are truly alone. I don't mean just physically solitary, but free from the invisible tethers of social expectation. At first, it may feel like standing at the edge of an abyss. That primal human fear of being cast out from the tribe, a fear inherited from our ancient ancestors, rises in your chest. We are, after all, the descendants of those who survived by staying close to the firelight. Those who lived or died based on their place in the social order. Yet, there comes a moment, if you let yourself stay in the quiet long enough, when the fear begins to transform into something else entirely. The absence of others ceases to be a deprivation and becomes instead a vast and open space where an extraordinary metamorphosis can take place. Without the constant mirror of relationships reflecting back a fragmented self, you as a parent, you as a worker, you as a friend, you as a lover, the constructed identity begins to soften at its edges. The roles you play so convincingly in the grand theater of daily life start to feel like ill-fitting costumes, hanging loosely on your frame. In solitude, there is no need to perform the version of yourself that makes others comfortable. There is no need to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, or to nod along with opinions you don't share, or to feign interest where none exists. The exhausting, lifelong work of maintaining a persona simply falls away, and what remains is something far more interesting, the raw, unfiltered, authentic presence beneath all the pretending. This is where the real magic begins. As the social self dissolves, your ordinary perception starts to shift in subtle but profound ways. That tree outside your window is no longer just a tree, a piece of background scenery. You may suddenly notice the intricate way its branches trace patterns against the sky. Patterns that feel strangely familiar, as if the tree and your perception of it are partners in the same unfolding, artistic moment. The cup of coffee in your hands becomes an entire universe of sensation. It is the warmth radiating through the ceramic, the rich bitterness blooming across your tongue, the way the steam rises in delicate, ghostly curls that vanish into nothingness. These are no longer just things you are observing. They are experiences you are participating in. Moments in which the boundary between you and the world dissolves. We have walked into the silent space and allowed the constructed social self to fall away like a heavy cloak. We are beginning to see the world not through a filter of roles and expectations, but with the raw, unfiltered eyes of our own being. This is the first great, liberating step. But what comes next, once the old identity has dissolved in the crucible of solitude? How do we begin to build a new and more authentic relationship with ourselves, and eventually with the world, from this place of profound inner wholeness? We have walked into the silent space and allowed the heavy cloak of our social self to fall away. We are beginning to see the world not through a filter of roles and expectations, but with the raw, unfiltered eyes of our own being. This is the first great, liberating step, but the journey inward doesn't end there. The process of true transformation begins with a fundamental shift in our perception of reality itself. Starting with the very fabric of time, in this unguarded state of solitude, you will notice that time itself behaves differently. The anxious, forward-marching momentum of social life, that relentless inner voice asking, "What's next? What's needed? What's expected?" begins to dissolve. It gives way to a more fluid, cyclical, and spacious experience of the present. Social time is a frantic soldier, always on the march. Solitary time is a deep, slow-moving river, inviting you to float. You are no longer on the clock, you are in the flow. You might find yourself sitting perfectly still for what feels like hours, utterly captivated by the simple drama of sunlight moving across a wall. You are caught in what the Zen tradition calls shoshin, or beginner's mind, a state where everything, no matter how familiar, appears fresh, new, and alive with shimmering possibility. The world is reborn before your very eyes, moment by moment. In this state, the deeply ingrained modern compulsion to document, to share, to turn experiences into social currency, simply falls away. That breathtaking sunset you are witnessing doesn't need to be photographed for Instagram to prove that it happened. Its beauty exists utterly and completely in itself, and your witnessing of it is a private, sacred communion that requires no audience. To try and capture it is to diminish it. To try and explain it is to miss the point. You learn to let experiences wash over you and through you, without the anxious need to possess them or convert them into a story about yourself. You reclaim your life from the marketplace of social approval. This alchemical transformation of solitude works its most profound magic on the very concept of self. Normally, we think of ourselves as discrete, solid entities moving through the world. We are this body, this name, this collection of thoughts, memories, and preferences. We feel solid, separate, and clearly defined, but in prolonged, deep solitude, this comforting solidity begins to waver. The hard edges begin to soften. You may catch yourself mid-thought and wonder, with genuine curiosity, who or what exactly is having this thought. The persistent, commanding sense of being a stable I, at the center of your experience starts to feel more like a useful convention than an absolute truth. It feels less like a noun and more like a verb, a process, a flickering, an awareness. The boundaries you once took for granted begin to blur. Your breathing becomes the room's gentle rhythm. The distant sounds of the neighborhood, a barking dog, a passing car, are no longer separate events happening out there. They become the seamless soundtrack of your own awareness. The line between inner and outer grows beautifully, wonderfully porous. What remains in this dissolution isn't a terrifying emptiness, but the vibrant, pulsating interconnectedness that was always there, merely obscured by the noise and busyness of social engagement. Paradoxically, this melting away of the separate self leads not to disappearance, but to a profound and breathtaking expansion. Without friends to constantly reflect back a limited, manageable version of who you are, you become free to experience yourself as something much, much larger. You are not just a person in isolation. You are a conscious point of awareness in the vast, intelligent web of existence. The silence between your thoughts grows wider, more inviting, and in those precious gaps of mental quiet, you might sense something utterly astonishing, that you are not just in the universe, but that you are of the universe. That bird singing outside your window isn't separate from your hearing of it. The bird's song and your hearing are two aspects of a single, indivisible event. The night sky isn't something a small creature, looks up at from a distance. It is something you are already a part of. You are, quite literally, stardust contemplating itself. This is the hidden gift buried in what our society dismisses as loneliness. It is the discovery that when all other voices finally fade, what remains isn't a void of nothingness, but the deep, wordless, and intimate conversation with reality itself. The alchemy occurs precisely because there is no one there to translate the experienced into shared, reductive language. There's no need to shrink the infinite down to something that can be posted, or discussed, or validated by like. The transformation happens in the unspoken, in the spaces between words, in the visceral, cellular realization that you were never as separate, as isolated, or as small as you had always imagined. And from this earth-shattering realization comes a new kind of freedom. It is the understanding that any future relationships you choose to enter will be just that, choices born of fullness, rather than desperate attempts to escape the imaginary prison of yourself, because the prison you now see with absolute clarity was never real to begin with. We must speak of the invitation of emptiness. We fear being friendless because, at its core, we fear emptiness. We have been told to equate emptiness with worthlessness. We think it means we are unloved, unwanted, and unseen. But what if emptiness is not a void? What if it is a womb? In the quiet, you finally meet yourself, not the self that is shaped, edited, and approved by others, but the self that simply is. And from that place of profound self-acceptance, relationships, when they do come, are no longer chains of desperate need, but free and joyful dances. You no longer seek friends to fill a hole in your being. You enjoy them as you enjoy the sunset, not because you lack anything, but simply because the moment is beautiful. We spend our lives running from this sacred emptiness. We fill every silent moment with chatter, every blank space on our calendars with distraction, terrified of what we might encounter in the unoccupied territories of our own being. Emptiness has been sold to us as the great enemy, a howling abyss that threatens to swallow us whole if we dare to peer over its edge. And so, we accumulate friends, lovers, possessions, and achievements, anything to build a fortress against the void, anything to prove we exist and reassure ourselves that we matter. But what if we have misunderstood emptiness entirely? What if the very thing we fear is actually the most fertile ground of all? Consider how nature itself works. The hollow reed is what makes music possible. A solid reed is silent. The empty womb is what gives new life its beginning. The vast space between the stars is what allows their light to shine and define the constellations. Emptiness is not absence, it is pure potential. When you find yourself without friends, without the constant stream of external validation, what first feels like a painful deprivation slowly, if you are patient, reveals itself as a profound invitation. It is an invitation to stop performing, to stop pretending, to stop trying to contort yourself into the shape of someone else's expectations. The ego, that fragile, anxious construct built entirely on social reflection, begins to lose its grip when there's no one around to reflect it back. It starves from a lack of attention, and in that softening, in that quiet decay of the false self, something extraordinary becomes possible. You start to experience reality directly, without the distorting filter of me. This is why so many of the world's great spiritual traditions speak of emptiness as divine. The Buddhist concept of sunyata is not about a bleak nihilism. It is about the liberating realization that all our fixed ideas about who we are and what the world is are ultimately insubstantial, like dreams. It is the freedom from the prison of our own concepts. The Christian mystics spoke of the dark night of the soul, not as a punishment from God, but as a sacred emptying, a process of divine grace that removes all that is false so that the soul can finally be filled with what is real. The Tao teaching reminds us, with its simple wisdom, that the usefulness of a bowl lies in its hollow center. We resist this ancient wisdom because we've been conditioned by a culture that screams the opposite message. We are taught to believe that a fullness of schedule, of social circle, of possessions, equals a fullness of worth. But the quiet truth is often the exact opposite. Only when we are emptied of our preconceptions can we truly receive what is new. Only when we are emptied of our desperate need for approval can we experience authentic love. In the sustained absence of friends, you begin to notice how much of your inner dialogue wasn't really yours at all, but a cacophony of voices you've absorbed over the years. The voices of parents, teachers, ex-lovers, and society at large are all there, whispering their demands about who you should be and what you should want. As these voices fade from a lack of reinforcement, you are left with a rare and precious opportunity to hear your own thoughts, your own true impulses, undistorted. At first, this can be terrifying. Without the buffer of social interaction, all those unresolved fears, Unexamined desires and buried griefs may rise to the surface, demanding to be seen, but this is the alchemical fire. This is the sacred process by which base metal is transformed into gold. It is painful, yes, but it is a purifying fire. What emerges from it isn't unpolished, perfected, flawless self. It is something far more valuable, an authenticity that is rugged, real, and completely your own. The magic happens when you stop resisting the emptiness and instead allow yourself to fall into it. It is like the story of the man who, terrified of the dark, runs from his own shadow until he collapses from exhaustion, only to discover in that moment of surrender that the darkness was never chasing him at all. In that surrender to solitude, the most paradoxical truth reveals itself. What you feared was nothingness was actually the birthplace of everything. Your creativity, your intuition, your deepest wisdom, none of these emerge from the crowded, noisy places where you're constantly adjusting yourself to fit in. They emerge from the silent depths where you are no longer trying to be anything at all. This is why artists, mystics, and great thinkers throughout history have always sought out solitude. It is not because they despise human connection, but because they understand that true connection with themselves, with their craft, with the divine, requires first passing through the sacred gate of emptiness. The blank page, the silent chapel, the empty studio, these are not voids to be filled, but sacred spaces where something new and true can finally emerge. When you stop seeing your aloneness as a deficiency and start seeing it as a clearing, you make room for what actually matters to take root. And here is the great secret that lies at the heart of it all. The emptiness is already full. The silence isn't actually silent. It is teeming with a subtle, vibrant life that is impossible to perceive when we are distracted by the gross noise of constant social interaction. The Japanese have a concept called ma, which refers to the space between things. They teach that it is this very emptiness that gives form its meaning. The pause between musical notes is what creates the melody. The space between the branches is what allows us to appreciate the beauty of the tree. In the same way, your solitude isn't the absence of connection. It is the very condition that makes authentic connection possible. Because only when you've touched the depths of your own being, only when you are comfortable in your own boundless company, can you truly meet another without using him as an escape from yourself. So, when you find yourself without friends, do not rush to fill the space. Sit in it, breathe into it, let it unsettle you, let it strip away everything that isn't essential. What remains in the end won't be some grand, egoic revelation about how special you are. It will be something far more profound and comforting, the realization that you don't need to be special to belong, that you, exactly as you are in this moment, flawed, uncertain, incomplete, are already an inseparable part of the great, mysterious unfolding of life. The emptiness was never your enemy. It was your most honest companion, the silent witness to everything you have ever been, and everything you are becoming. And then, if and when you choose, you return to the world of others, but you return transformed. You do not return as a beggar, clutching desperately at companionship to feel whole. You return as a king or queen who walks among others, fully present, without needing a single thing from them. Your solitude has made you whole, and from that place of overflowing wholeness, every connection becomes a freely given gift, not a desperate demand. So do not fear the empty room. Do not fear the path without another's footsteps beside yours, for it is there, in the great and sacred alone, that you may finally hear the most important voice of all, your own. And when you do, you might just discover, to your eternal astonishment, that you were never truly alone to begin with. You emerge from solitude, not the bitter loneliness of exclusion, but the rich, voluntary aloneness where you've tasted your own depths, and you re-enter the world of relationships with an entirely new orientation. You no longer approach others as missing pieces of yourself. The capacity to connect arises not from an inner void, but from an overflowing fullness. This is the hidden power's final revelation. That true relationship can only begin when you no longer use people as life rafts to keep yourself afloat. You stop making the impossible demand that others validate your existence, because you have discovered, in the silent crucible of solitude, that you already exist, utterly and completely, without anyone's permission. This changes everything. Friendship becomes a dance rather than a transaction. Love ceases to be a hunger and becomes a warmth to be shared. You become more magnetic, not because you are performing, but precisely because you are not. You have learned the great paradox. The more comfortable you become with having no friends, the more capable you become of true, deep, and authentic friendship. The power was never in isolation itself, but in what isolation reveals, that you were never lacking to begin with. This is not an easy path, but it is a deeply rewarding one. It is the journey from seeking validation to embodying wholeness. If this exploration of the inner world has resonated with you, if it has stirred something deep within, I invite you to join our community of fellow travelers. Subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell, for this is more than just a channel. It is a quiet space for deep reflection. To make this real, share one word in the comments below that describes what this idea of authentic solitude means to you. Let us create a tapestry of understanding. Together, thank you for walking this path with me today.